The Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, has voted to increase the benchmark interest rate by 50 basis points to 18%. The CBN Governor, Godwin Emefiele, disclosed this while reading the communique of the second MPC meeting of the year on Tuesday. Addressing journalists at the end of the two-day meeting in Abuja, Mr. Emefiele said the committee voted to keep the asymmetric corridor at plus 100 and minus 500 basis points around the MPR. The liquidity ratio of 30% and cash reserve ratio of 32.5% were also retained. Analysts in the country had predicted the CBN and the MPC may not raise the lending rate at the end of the Monetary Policy Committee. However, the governor stated the slight increase is to mitigate the effect of inflation and other economic issues. Now, what impact will this have on Nigeria's business economy, especially manufacturers? We'll delve into this conversation with Vea Lakwaga, Senior Analyst, Budget Foundation. Thank you for joining us. Good morning. Well, this isn't the first time the CBN would be increasing the inflation rate. We have seen consistent increase since May 2022, and of course this has seen the CBN abandon its dovish stance by increasing the interest rate by 150 basis points just this year. What are your thoughts on this hawkish stance of the CBN?
Thanks for having me, Omapolanle. Great to be here. I think the rate has been expected. The rate increase is one to be expected. And when you look at the performance of the CBN regarding this particular hawkish stance, as it were, it started actually in April of 2022. And that was when the CBN had noted some of the fastest increases in inflation, I think 5 years or 6 years prior. So, it's been a long time coming. I guess everybody saw this, and if you had bet money on CBN increasing the rate, you should have been laughing all the way to the bank by now. But, looking at the broader context, the United Kingdom has also increased its own interest rates to about 4.25%, I think by a quarter of a basis point. And, they have also been experiencing some considerable level of inflation. And, with Brexit having happened, the United Kingdom has suffered some serious, economic downturn as a result of leaving the European Union, especially in places like labor and services. So much so that Nigeria was recorded to have been, in addition to Zimbabwe, two of the countries that have put forward the highest number of immigrants to fill those labor shortages. So the United Kingdom, seeing that inflation was on the rise, decided to put, their money where their mouth was and, try to correct that situation. The United States as well, Jerome Powell announced an increase in the Fed's reserve rate by about a quarter of a basis point to about 4.75%. The U.S. as well adopting a relatively hawkish stance, as they have had like 9 consecutive interest rate hikes in this previous season.
But yes, we know that inflation is a global phenomenon, and the hike in interest rate has also been the stance of major, central banks in the world. But should we compare our economy with that of those developed economy? You talked about the United States, the United Kingdom. Looking at the peculiarity of the kind of inflation Nigeria is experiencing, which is a cost-push inflation, should we be taking the same stance, the same measure that these other countries are taking?
I mean, it's a great question. Why we look at other economies is because the global context affects all of us. Indeed. And when you have, supply shortages, or when there is a crunch in commodities, for instance, from China, it affects almost all of these countries I have just listed, because we are all relatively strong trading partners. So it would be remiss of us not to consider that, in addition to the fact that most central banks, at least of democratic countries, adopt the same types of monetary policy tools. Of course, the contexts are different, but it's interesting to see the effect and the impact of the use of these monetary tools, on these various economies. And then again, looking at the fact that Nigeria supplies a high amount of labor to the United Kingdom, for instance, it's interesting to see just what our citizens are doing in a country that has been able to act fast as regards its own inflation and put proper measures in place to solve this problem. I'm not sure if the same can be said for Nigeria, though, but it's interesting to watch these cases as they unfold.
But if you look at the trend of inflation figures we've been recording from November to December, there was a downward trend from 21.37 to from 21.47 to 21.34, and then in January it jacked up again to 21.8, and then February 21.9. Would you say that the CBN stance, especially moving or reviewing the interest rate upwards, would you say it has had any positive effect aside, the downward trend, which of course the CBN attributed to all of their monetary policies and interest rate moves? Would you say that these moves have had any positive effect on the interest rate, or rather on inflation? Because one of the major reasons CBN gives is that they are trying to fight inflation rate.
I would disagree with the central bank, and it's interesting that you raised that example. The CBN governor in his address mentioned that the monetary policy tools are working and they've seen a decline in inflation, which I find rather humorous, because the reverse is what has happened. Even the chairman, the new chairman of the LCCI, Mr. Chinyere, was saying that there seems to be a negative relationship between the interest rate increases or the monetary policy rate increases and inflation. Inflation has increased, quite regularly since 2015. In fact, we've had the highest inflation we've seen so far. I will, however, provide a caveat to that statement in the sense that monetary policy tools are always backwards-looking tools. As is the same with government policy in general. It's very difficult to really see the impact in real time. It's impossible to see the impact in real time of government decisions, because you will have to wait at least a quarter or a half year before the effects, start to show. Yes, but what we can see, and placing in context the naira scarcity, the petrol scarcity of late last year, which continued into this year, and the exchange rate crisis, the wide margins between the CBN rate and the parallel rate, these are all reasons why this interest rate, this monetary policy rate increase may not show an effect immediately. More so, if you look at the details, or you look at the fine lines of providing credit, by the central bank, one would really question the stance of the central bank, in the sense that it is meant to be the bank to the federal government, while commercial banks are meant to be the financial intermediaries. However, the central bank, more often than not, is acting like a financial intermediary in the provision of, its anchor borrower program monies, which from beginning to date have hit over 1 trillion naira. In fact, I think for this quarter, they have disbursed around 39 billion naira. So one asks themselves, what would be the impact of flooding the markets with this type of finance? And what would it mean for the way the deposit money banks are meant to act as intermediaries? If you have a central bank that is playing the role of a deposit money bank and flooding the economy with finances, it could provide some sort of toxicity and crowd out the intermediation function of the deposit money banks that would be detrimental to the economy, in the medium term at least.
Well, let's talk economy. Most times when interest rates are raised, short-term borrowing costs are usually elevated for financial institutions, and that has a ripple effect on virtually all other borrowing costs for companies and consumers. Let's talk about this effect, especially on businesses.
So, looking at the banks, the banks I see are the biggest winners from this whole enterprise. I think they have recorded an increase in their assets, moving from around, I think, 59 trillion to around 73.59 trillion, as at, I think at the end of 2022, if not early 2023. So, with an increase in their assets, one would look at the ratio of their non-performing loans. Somehow, the banks have been able to keep or maintain a relatively safe position. The central bank advises loan ratio should be 5% of their overall liabilities, and all Nigerian banks, or at least in the aggregate, have been able to keep.
Okay, talking about how banks are, of course, responding to the interest rate and how it would affect businesses. We still have Veala Kwaga talking to us about all of these issues. What impact would manufacturers, what would this have on them, especially looking at the current cash crunch that is still biting hard on the economy? Veala, welcome back. Go ahead with your thoughts.
Yes, so you have these banks that are doing relatively well, but the non-performing loan ratio, one also has to consider the impact of inflation and how that would affect the absolute size of their non-performing loans, on their balance sheets. Looking at manufacturers, I think more critically, one would have to be very wary to say that these monetary policy tools are helping, in the sense that they are directly taking these loans far more expensive than they once were. Even though the CBN has left a relatively wide margin, I think it's about 100 points to a minus 500. So that sort of provides some considerable leverage. But if the manufacturers are unable to get these monies due to the naira scarcity and the challenges we've had with the electronic money transfers and the infrastructure that supports money transfers, one really wonders whether manufacturers would be able to get some respite. More so, there is really not so much data available on the manufacturers' price indexes and even the retail price indexes that are meant to measure just how much producers and manufacturers are buying in.
But would this eventually lead to inflation, because further inflation, because
but
okay, go ahead. All right, looks like
it has on production. There has been a rise in some components of the consumer price index, looking at tubers, looking at vegetables, looking at yam, and looking at rent. So when you think about the impact, these are components that have risen the sharpest in the short term, or at least in the last quarter, according to the NBS. So one can then extrapolate and think about how manufacturers and producers would be affected in this near term.
Yeah, so I was saying, wouldn't this lead to further inflation, because it's looking like a vicious cycle? Now the manufacturers have to lend at a higher rate, which would eventually have its ripple effect on the prices of commodities. Purchasing power is reduced. Consumers have to buy these commodities at higher prices. Wouldn't that lead to further inflation? Veala. Okay, looks like we've
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question. Could you repeat it, please?
Okay, so I was talking about the fact that it's already looking like a vicious cycle, because if manufacturers have to go to the banks to lend, to get these loans at higher interest rate, it would of course have its effect on the prices of commodities, because they would have to take it back to the consumers, who would have to buy these things at higher prices. Wouldn't that lead to further inflation in the economy?
I'm afraid I didn't get that question.
Okay, I'll take it again. I was talking about the fact that all of this is looking like it's going to be counterproductive, because the manufacturers would now have to get their loans at a higher interest rate. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yes. So manufacturers now have to get their loans at a higher interest rate, and then it would of course have a fallback on consumers, who now have to buy the goods and commodities at higher prices. Wouldn't that lead to further inflation? And in the sense of it, isn't it looking like we're now creating more inflation as against fighting inflation?
You're absolutely right. And, that is an obvious fallout of increasing the interest rate, because at the end of the day, someone is going to have to suffer it. And it's oftentimes, the end user or the consumer. And this is why pressure must be made to monetary authorities and fiscal authorities, because these impacts and their effects do not just, affect the monetary system or the real sector. they affect the entire economy and the livelihoods of Nigerians. So what does, or how does the economy, engage with government intervention and government service delivery? So we're looking at provision of power, we're looking at improving infrastructure, and these are things that would help businesses, where businesses have access to 24 hours electricity. Of course, that would positively impact manufacturing and production, where businesses are able to transport their goods from point A to point B on a smooth road that is free of potholes. That would also improve their own bottom lines, where businesses have access to proper storage facilities, especially in the agricultural sector. That would also positively impact their bottom lines. And when all of this business can be done in a safe environment that is free from robberies and kidnappings, this would definitely positively affect businesses. So we need to look at the dual rules of the government, specifically monetary policy and fiscal policy, and ensure that there's a harmonization of these rules, and you do not have a situation like we do today, where the central bank is basically playing the role of the fiscal authority by providing this finance. It may be well intentioned, but I think it's bringing out more harm than good.
Well, you just put that quite aptly, and you just answered my next question, because I was going to talk about incentives, infrastructures for these businesses to mitigate the impact of all of the interest rate hike. And of course, the IMF also spoke in tandem with that. But let's get your final thoughts on this so we can take this home.
Yeah, I mean, the interest rates, the MPR hike was expected. I think businesses saw it coming. And, this really speaks to the role that these signals are meant to provide to the economy. The means through which a central bank ensures price stability is proactive communication and follow through with the policy actions that it has said it would take. This would thereby ensure that people can save and businesses can invest accordingly. I mean, where the economy is doing well. And I'm speaking about communication in the abstract, but looking at it more practically, where the CBN is unable to follow through with its policy actions and statements, it brings about a distortion, because users or actors in the economy are seeing conflicting signals. The bank is saying one thing, but acting in a different way. So, as on behalf of all Nigerians, we implore the monetary authorities to ensure that, they walk the talk and they ensure that their actions really match their policy statements.
Very brilliant analysis there. Thank you so much, Veya Lakwaga, Senior Analyst, Budget Foundation, and have a good day.
Thank you for having me. Enjoy your day.
Still to come, 75% of electricity consumed in Nigeria comes from diesel and petrol-powered generators. What is the import of this on the economy? That is our next focus. We'll be right back. Stay with us.